What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Sovereign Mindset. My name is Mike Ruiz, and today I spoke with Ryan Somers. Ryan, I've been following him now for quite some time on Twitter, and I really enjoy his tweets. I enjoy his writing, and I really like what he has to say. So I asked him to come on for a discussion, and it turned out to be a great conversation. The first half an hour, we talk about Ryan's background, we talk about his life with autism, and how he got into writing and his current project. And around the 30-minute mark, we get into life in Canada and the trucker protest. We talk about what it's like to live in clown world, how incentives matter and how they dictate our actions. We also talk about how the incentive structure is currently broken and how Bitcoin could be a possible solution. And just throughout the conversation, we get into various thoughts on the macro and political spectrum. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys do too. With that said, let's get right into it. All right. Boom. Welcome, Ryan Somers, to the podcast. Ryan, dude, you want to introduce yourself? Anything you want to say, as little as you want to say, as much as you want to say.
Yeah, well, first off, Mike, I just want to thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. I was already telling you that, you've become one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. Lots of great content you're putting out, lots of uh, really interesting ideas and philosophies that I'm like learning about and getting into, and I appreciate that. But yeah, for me, like I live in Canada. I currently live in a small town called Bayfield, which is on Lake Huron in Canada, little town. I live in a little cottage in the woods. But I've kind of got a long history of being all over the place. I spent a decade in Toronto. I lived in Montreal, Vancouver, a few other places. I've done a lot of different things. I was uh, involved in the music industry a lot at a younger age. In my teens and 20s, I started a hip hop magazine when I was like 18 or 19 that I published for a few years that got some international recognition, which was pretty cool. I then ended up working in the music industry. I was the first hip hop editor at Vice magazine back in the day, and did a lot of content with them. I went into the music industry as an A&R guy at Universal Music for a short period of time. Found out that the big giant corporate environment wasn't for me. And then, yeah, I did music journalism, wrote for a bunch of magazines. And then I got into, in between different gigs, I would always kind of float back into bartending. I love bartending. Got really into the craft beer scene really early. So that was a big part of my life. So I ended up working in craft beer at one point. I ended up out in BC as the territory manager for a large craft beer importer. So I was basically running the whole province out of my kitchen, which was my kitchen table, and that was pretty fun. Did that for several years, and then recently in the last couple years, after kind of lifelong working on figuring out different things, I discovered that I am autistic. So I had a lot of different issues throughout my life, anxiety, depression, things like that, and just kind of like feeling disconnected from the world in a lot of ways. So I went through this process 2 years ago, started the process 2 years ago of figuring all that out, ended up with a diagnosis of level 1 autism and ADHD as well, with a few other things thrown in there. Kind of a fun mixed bag of autistic spectrum disorders. And then these days, I've just kind of landed in this small little cabin in the woods, and I'm living a quieter life than the whole big sort of beer and music industries that I was involved in. And currently writing a book. I was hired last year to write an autobiography for somebody, and I'm working on that right now, which is I'm within weeks of finishing, which I'm really excited about, and I plan to keep going in that direction, just doing lots of writing. And then also, I've always been a very aware and conscious person, and very skeptical of what's going on in the world. So I think in our current days, that has taken over a lot of my bandwidth, focusing on all of the, you know, policies around a certain virus that is apparently going around the world that I have yet to see. But and then anyway, beyond that, man, I've always been a deeply spiritual person. I've had a lifelong meditation practice, and I've been getting really deep into that. I just came off a 10-day silent retreat, which was amazing.
Wow. I want to hear
And
more about that.
yeah, and I'm just kind of really focused there. I think in this time we're in right now in the world, there's a lot of stress. A lot of people are feeling a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure. There's a lot of emotions, fear. Obviously, I know, anyone who pays attention to human psychology knows that fear is something that can be manipulated and turned into anger and hatred. I think there's a lot of that floating around. A lot of really good people are not acting like good people currently, with a lot of judgment. And so I'm trying to, I was feeling a lot of that anxiety as well. And I was feeling like I needed to just really deepen my spiritual practice. I know you're a very spiritual guy, so I'm interested to talk to you about that stuff as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I am here. And then also I think one of the reasons I discovered you is last year, 2020, through an acquaintance of mine. He started hipping me to Bitcoin. And I had heard about it for years, never really looked into it. I mean, I think once about 10 years ago, I sat down on my laptop and I tried to figure out how to buy Bitcoin. I failed because I just didn't know how to do it. I'm kicking myself that I didn't stick it out a little longer, because had I
Sure.
bought Bitcoin 10 years ago, my life would be a little different right now. That being said, I'm happy where I am. I'm happy I'm here now in the Bitcoin space, and discovering people like yourself and other people that I've been following on Twitter specifically, and learning a lot about that world. And for the first time in my life, I can see a pathway for my daughter's future. So
Mhm.
for me, getting into Bitcoin is not even, it's
Not
partially
about you, huh?
about me, but it's 99% about my daughter's future. So I mean, money I would be putting into like a savings account for her right now is I'm not putting it in a savings account for her. So
Wow, that's an incredible background. I didn't realize it's so like diverse and eclectic. That's it's really interesting. There's so much stuff.
thanks. Yeah, I've kind of bounced around a lot. Like I've sort of just been a bit of a nomad and a bit of a guy that I just kind of like get itchy feet and I start walking, and then I end up somewhere and I end up falling into something interesting. And that's kind of the way I've always lived. It's not been a stable life, but I've got a lot of, I feel like I've always been more about collecting experiences and stories and relationships and character building than I have been about necessarily collecting like a house in the suburbs and
Sure.
cars and all that stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah. That's I've been that way as well. A little bit of both, a mix of both, but now I have definitely tapped into more of a character building phase of my life, going back in my formative, plugging up those holes that I didn't develop in my formative years. And
yeah,
it's been a fun journey. But I want to get into um, your autism diagnosis if we can,
yeah,
because I don't know much about it. And I'm curious if you could kind of explain to me what it is and how that has affected your life. Or um,
yeah,
I know you got an autism podcast as well, right?
yeah, yeah.
And
So I have a podcast called The Life Autistic,
uh-huh.
with Ryan Somers, and so um, I'll go back about maybe 2 years, right around the start of the whole pandemic, and my partner and I had been having some significant issues for well, our entire relationship, and well, for a couple years. This is the mother of my child, and I just kind of got to this phase of my life. I had always had questions. I always knew I was different. I mean, a lot of autistic people describe it as feeling like you're an alien here on Earth. Like you just feel like you're not from here. I always had that feeling. I'm like, I just don't really get how people relate to each other, how they interact. Like conversations are awkward for me. There's like this sort of subconscious social understanding that everyone seems to have that I don't have. So
Interesting.
I've heard that described. I described it like that too. It's like being an alien. Like you're just dropped into Earth. You look like everyone else, but you don't really understand what's happening or like how people communicate. I had from a very young age a lot of social issues. Like I just got overwhelmed socially. Was happier being alone a lot of the time. Very creative. I'm a very active imagination. I was talented artistically. I could write. I could draw. I had music talent, all that stuff. Oh, I forgot to mention in my past somewhere, there was a time in there for a few years where I was in a rap group and put out a couple CDs and moved around too. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But so I always had this feeling my whole life, and I also had several instances of autistic burnout, which I think also led to me being this nomad and jumping around so much because I would get into a, a position or like a job or a career or a plate, and then I would just go full on and just dive in and get into it, and then I would just have like a burnout phase uh, where I would just like it's like my brain just short circuited, and then I just couldn't function, and I would have to take a break and retreat and like recover from that. Of course, experiencing all that in my life without knowing I was autistic, I didn't know what it was. So I had all these. I was like, do I have depression? I have anxiety. Like, am I bipolar? Do I have chronic fatigue? Like, what do I don't understand all these
Ryan, can
things.
I just pause you right there and ask a little bit? What is autism, like from a physiological standpoint or a
Okay.
psychological standpoint? Like do you how does it? Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't know. This is like first time I'm learning about autism.
Okay.
You hear it talked about
Yeah.
a lot, but I don't
So
really specifically know what it is.
okay, gotcha. So there's so autism is categorized, it's ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. So it's categorized as a neurological disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Um I like to think of it as a difference, not a disorder. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything wrong with me. I just think I'm different than but there are different traits and aspects of it. One is the social aspect. People and again, there's a bunch of different traits, and they can all be sort of at different levels. So you get some people which are like severely autistic, and others which are like me that they would have called like high functioning autism or whatever. Like I can still go to the store, I can talk to people, but whereas some severely autistic people are nonverbal, they need 24/7 care. But it's a neurological disorder. There's a lot of it. It has to do with sensory processing, so that's why you'll see a lot of people with really severe autism that are just kind of like this, like they just can't handle if a noise happens or they get overloaded sensorily. So I have that, but on a lesser
Okay,
scale. So
gotcha.
there's a sensory issue, there's a social interaction issue. Like there's this not being able to like communication difficulties. So a lot of people with autism have difficulty understanding facial expression, body language, tone of voice,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. We don't read that properly. We also tend to take language literally. So a lot of times when you speak to people and they kind of people beat around the bush, or you're kind of like when they talk and they don't really say what they mean, but everyone kind of knows how to read between the lines and understand what they're saying. Whereas an autistic person is just sitting there going, I don't know what the hell you guys are talking.
Oh, so the little social nuances you don't really
Yeah.
pick up on. Okay.
So there's a lot of that. Like, I mean, I don't know, you hear people say like, 75% of communication is nonverbal. So, okay, that's 75%. It's like I'm dyslexic. I can't read it. So
Gotcha.
if I'm talking to you, like this happens to me all the time. I'll be talking to somebody and then their facial expression or their tone of voice or their body language will change slightly, but I don't know what it means. So to me, it's really confusing.
Mhm.
Whereas most people just pick up those subtleties, no problem. They process them. But for me, like if I'm talking to you, we're hanging out, and then suddenly your facial expression changes. Like I have to stop and ask you, go, hey man, your expression just changed. Like, what does that mean?
Got you, got you.
And it might not mean anything, or it might mean something, but it might be a subtle thing that most people would pick up on, but I have to ask you to explain it. So I'm getting, and this has been a kind of an interesting thing for me, being empowered in the last couple of years, learning about this, getting my diagnosis, understanding, because now I feel empowered to do that, to stop someone and go, hey, explain what's going on. Your body language changed. What does that mean? Um,
Gotcha. So it's giving you a framework to kind of understand your own psyche in a
yeah,
lot of ways, right? In
yeah.
your own
And a
okay.
lot of autistic people have struggled with certain things, like uh, um, eye contact is one of them. Like I had to consciously teach myself how to do eye contact with people because I'm not comfortable with it. I don't like looking. I don't like eye contact, which is kind of unfortunately a bad trait in our society because our society values eye contact. And we teach people, oh, if someone doesn't look you in the eye, they're shady, they're dishonest, they're, but when I was a kid, I didn't look people in the eye because I'm autistic, but nobody knew that. So I had often instances of people saying to me when I was younger, like, or like friends of mine, like their parents would say to their kids, like, "Oh, I don't want you hanging out with that Ryan guy. Like, I don't trust him. He doesn't look us in the eye. Like, they thought I was a shady kid." I have a
Mhm.
heart of gold, man. Like, I'm like the
Mhm.
most loving, honest person with like integrity is like the most important trait to me in
Sure.
life, and I've always been that way. But it's just funny, but you get misjudged. So I mean that happens, and it's
Mhm.
fine. So anyway, I don't know if like that's some of the traits with autism. I experienced a lot of those in my life, but didn't know. Another big one is autistic overwhelm. Like when you're out in the world, because these interactions with people are so much more difficult, they require so much more energy that like when you like I would come home, I'd have a job and I'd come home on Friday and I would have no life the entire weekend. I would spend the entire weekend on the couch because I was zapped of all my energy from the work week, because it just takes so much more energy for an autistic person to interact with everyone else and do it. I mean, I remember one time I was working at a record company as an A&R guy, and the the being in the office during the day just was I hated it. I hated everything about it. I hate the people, the noise, but I had to be in the office. You had to be there. So I would go in the office and I would get nothing done all day, and then I would wait till everyone left at like 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then I would stay till midnight, and I'd get like 3 days worth of shit done in
Wow.
5 hours with no one around. So nowadays that I know how my brain works, like I wasn't empowered back then to understand, where I could have talked to my boss and went, "Hey man, like, can we work something out?" Because I ended up like burning out of that job. I couldn't handle it. But
Gotcha.
nowadays I could talk to them and go, "Hey, like this is what I need to make this work for me," and I'll do a good job. Like I in that job I was in, like I loved it and I was great at it, but I just my brain fizzled out. So
Well, cool. Well,
yeah.
it to me it sounds like it sounds like a good thing that you've tapped into at least what it is that you were just kind of, I guess, suffering from to some degree, right? Not understanding why it is that you were the way you are, and but I mean, I don't know. To me, when I speak to you, when I conversate with you, it just seems like, yeah, everything's normal. I mean, you seem like a
Yeah.
normal person to me. So yeah, it's interesting. It's
I'm very I'm one of those high functioning
uh-huh.
autistic people that I'm one of the traits of autism too that people experience is what we call masking, right? So
Mhm.
masking is when you you mask, you put on a mask of a neurotypical person, you learn how to, you train yourself how to act like a neurotypical person,
Oh, interesting.
so that you could fit into the neurotypical world without standing out, because you also internalize at a young age when you're autistic that your differences are wrong. You're told that your differences are wrong, so you hide those differences and you learn how to
Mm,
mimic and pretend like you're, and you do this all unconsciously. Like you're not aware that you're doing it. At least I wasn't as a child. So now
mhm.
part of my last couple years also with discovering I'm autistic. Like I was suspicious about being autistic for over a decade. I remember reading a couple articles by people that were autistic and just going, "Man, like this."
Sounds like what
I
I got.
was like, I could have written this. It sounds exactly like what my life is like. So you're not gonna see necessarily like my autism on full display, because I have also just internalized this masking.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, but at some point, I mean, I could start rocking. Like, I don't know. Like, it just could happen. I used to stop myself from doing that. Now I just let myself do it if it happens. I sometimes like my hands will move, shit like that. I kind of like unconsciously when I'm talking to somebody else, it's like my brain just puts a clamp on that stuff. But when I'm home alone, it's like, you know,
Interesting. So
I'm
I'll,
fucking.
I'll
I
I want to get into you.
don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this show.
Oh yeah, it's all good, bro. Um, dude, so I came across you on Twitter. Your tweets are great. I love them. They're like to the point and they hit home. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, come to find out you're a writer as well. Um, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. How'd you get into writing, and what kind of book are you writing right now? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I got into writing, I mean, from a very young age. Like I just um I'm I've just always been a very creative person. So like any creative expression, like I could drawing, painting, music, songwriting, writing, you know, everything. Like I'm just into acting. I've done some acting. Like I just anything creative I'm super into. So I started writing in high school. I got really into writing when I fell in love with hip hop. I started trying to write rhymes. I mean, that was my thing back in like, 89, 90, 91, like that era. So in high school, I had a rap group, and it was me and two other guys were MCs, and then we had a DJ. And so that was super fun. We'd get together, we'd write songs, we'd perform, we'd do talent shows. And then I loved it because it was an outlet. And then the group, I was the youngest guy in the group, and the other two MCs were a year or two older than me in high school. So they graduated before me and they were gone. And then I was like, oh man, I have no outlet. So I started a magazine. I was really in love with hip hop. This is going back to like the mid 90s now. There was the whole, I don't know if you're into hip hop very much or not,
Yeah,
but in the mid
absolutely.
90s, how old are you? Can I ask?
Yeah, I'm 39.
Okay. So you're a little younger than me. I'm 45, but you're not that much younger. Like, but in the mid 90s, there was this really big movement of like indie hip hop, like all these awesome artists coming out, this creative explosion. And I started a magazine. I was like, I'm going to start this hip hop magazine. There was a rapper named Divine Styler who was like kind of around in the late 80s, early 90s. He was affiliated with Ice-T and House of Pain. Like he was down with all those guys. He had put out these two amazing albums and then disappeared. So I named my magazine after him. I called it In Search of Divine Styler. I started this underground hip hop magazine, and that I just loved writing then because I loved having a voice, being able to write about what I wanted to, and then publish it out into the world. And that kind of led to writing for other magazines because then I started pitching stories to other music magazines, hip hop magazines. And then I met the guys from Vice who were in Montreal at the time, and through some mutual friends. And then I ended up getting hired by them to write the hip hop column and then do a feature. So I was basically the hip hop editor. I would do a column every issue and then one feature story every issue on a different hip hop artist. So that was great because I just had free reign. I could interview whoever I wanted, write about whoever I wanted, and I loved that. There'd be like 100,000 copies of this magazine going out there that people could read my column. Like it was just that felt really fun to me, and it felt good that I could use my column to uh, say what I wanted and talk about artists that I loved and help them get shine too. Like I really love that. So writing has just been something I've always loved. I took a break from it for a long time. Like I was working in the beer industry for a while, and then I had a small child, and anyone with kids knows like the first few years of your kid's life, you're not doing much else. But so I
So
just what's
what's
that?
what's so what are you into now? Like what are you writing about now, and what's your book about?
Yeah, so I just last year I decided I wanted to get back into writing, and it's funny, man. On January 1st last year, I wrote down I was doing my list for the year, and
Sure.
I finished the list, and then I walked away from it, and then I came back to it, and on the very bottom of it, I wrote, "Somebody will hire me to write a book this year."
Nice.
And then, like a few months later, this guy that I've known for a while, who's in the music business, he was a producer and a DJ, and then started two different companies as a successful entrepreneur. He texted me one day. He said, "Hey, dude, you still?" Or no, we were talking one day, and he's like, "What are you doing these days?" And I said, "Well, I want to get back into writing, and I want to do a book. I want to start writing biographies for people. I think that I'm really interested in humans and their stories." So anyway, it was just a casual conversation to catch up. So like 6 months later, he texts me back. He texts me. He's like, "Hey, dude, like, are you still want to write books?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." And he's like, "Okay, I got an idea." So I can't say who it is yet because we're still in the process. But so he hired me to write a biography. He's a really interesting guy. He was a DJ and a music producer in California. toured the world, worked with a lot of big name artists, and then he started a media company. They do like music for film and television and podcasts, and now he's got like a whole staff and just and he's a really good guy. Like he's a good person, and his story is super inspiring because he's this like guy that he should have quit about 20 times. You know, like his career was just he just kept getting knocked down, and he just refused to give up. I'm like, so we've been doing this book. We've been working on it, doing Zoom calls, and I'm transcribing and working on the book. And I'm like crying as I'm writing it because his story's so good. So I
Wow.
can't. So that's really great. I'm doing that. I'm getting close to getting that done, and now I'm just like, okay, like this is what I want to do. Is just write books, write biographies. I mean, maybe it's part of my autism, but I'm always so fascinated by humans and the amazing things we can do. And like most of the books I read are autobiographies because I just want to hear people's stories. I think that's
Sure.
why I love podcasts too, right? Especially these kind of long form ones because
Mhm.
I love hearing about people and like how they accomplish what they accomplish.
Now you're writing. Yeah, so I agree. It's been fun podcasting for me, getting to speak to other people, learn their stories. For instance, what we're doing right now
Yeah,
is super interesting. You know, you get a perspective. I mean, with modern technology, it's giving us so many opportunities to really like learn about each other
yeah,
and l- learn from each other. Right, that synergistic effect can
yeah,
really create. Uh, it can it can create such an advantage in your life
yeah,
when you can tap into people specifically who are doing what you're doing or who are where you are want to be at. So
yeah,
yeah, that's cool. But your tweets, so you've been right. What do you think about Twitter? Is Twitter writing?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Twitter,
because
I love Twitter because I mean, I mean, you probably experienced this. Like you start writing a tweet and you go past the thing and you're in the red,
yep,
and then you're like, okay, how can I got to fit this. So it's a challenge for writing because you got to go, how can I take this idea that I want to express and share and shrink it in a way? And I find that makes you a better writer because you look at it, they always say in writing, like, take out everything that doesn't need to be there. Like
yep.
every single sentence you should make as short as possible. Just get to the point. So I think Twitter is a great exercise for that. And I've just been kind of getting heavily back into Twitter in the last 6 months or so. I had a Twitter account for years. I didn't really use it.
Hmm.
But I think when I started researching Bitcoin, I got really onto Twitter because that's kind of where, you know,
That's
Bitcoin
where it
lives.
happens.
That's what happens. And then I started getting into with all this other shit in the world. You start expressing. And I think Twitter is totally writing, and I think I when you spend more time crafting tweets, you I think it does improve your abilities as a writer.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I noticed too. I've been making a conscious effort to become a better writer. Took a couple courses, and what I really like about Twitter is exactly what you're talking about. It's the constraint where the creativity happens because you have
Yeah.
to condense down this, maybe complicated idea into, 240 characters.
Yeah.
And so you really have to focus on the meaning of each word that you're using. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's been a fun endeavor for me over the past couple years, getting more active on Twitter and speaking more about what's happening in the world because it's also one of those things where it's also an outlet and
Yeah.
the reach and you can condense exactly what's happening in the world in a short tweet and it can go viral and that
Yeah.
could have more of an impact than any long form writing that you've kind of done. So at
Yeah.
least in this time for me, it's been one of those endeavors where I'm like, I think I'm having more of an impact writing in this short form on Twitter versus
Yeah.
like kind of writing out long form. They both have their
Yeah.
I think they both have their place, but as of right now, getting the memes going, they kind of say the memes will save the world kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
so it's been
true.
fun. I love your tweets. I love reading what you write on there as well. And so I kind of
Yeah.
want to get into that. What's life been like in Canada?
Um, it's weird, man. It's
Yeah.
so
Are you
weird.
so in the small town that you're at, are you affected by a lot of these restrictions? Has the town kind of absorbed and integrated these kind of mandates and
Yeah.
restrictions into everyday life?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm affected. I mean, I mean, I'm probably less affected than I would be if I lived in the city,
Mm-hmm.
because and I'm also less affected because of my personality, because I don't give a shit. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like I'm kind of like, all right, I and hey, I can't go to a pub, I can't go to a restaurant, I can't go to the movies. I'm like, I don't give a flying about any of those things, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? Like I quit
Mm-hmm.
drinking a year and a half ago. I don't care about going out to eat. I don't need to go spend $100 on a meal at a restaurant. I can go spend $15 on a steak and eat that at home and drink a glass of water. I'm good. Like, so my lifestyle has changed a lot. So, but I mean, I still, yeah, you still see it. You still, I don't do the mask thing anymore. I go to the grocery store, I get some dirty looks, whatever. But people where I live is a lot of older demographic.
Uh-huh.
It's a retirement area. So I mean, and they're fully bought on to the whole narrative, right?
Wow.
Which is crazy. And then, I mean, being in Canada, what I'm seeing is, I mean, I'm sure what a lot of us are seeing in a lot of other places, the whole kind of like leftist woke kind of movement of the last several years. I mean, this is their moment. You know what I mean? Like, this is their moment to virtue signal and prove their loyalty to the narrative and to progress, and to virtue signaling how good people they are, while at the same time, like, uh, being judgmental and condescending to people who think differently than they do. But Canada's scary right now, man. Canada is scary. Like, I grew up in what I always thought was a free country. We have this experiment in Canada where we're sort of, let's combine let's combine freedom with a little bit of socialism and see how that works with, socialized medicine and all this stuff. And it's kind of this trade-off where you go, okay, well, if I get cancer, I don't have to sell my house. So that's good. We pay for that in taxes, but at the same time, we still have, or at least we did, the same sort of freedoms that the rest of the free world has. So, but currently I'm in a country now where like, if I wanted to leave Canada, I have to sneak out of the country. I mean, that's insane to me. I never would have thought that would ever be possible. There are people that, um,
Ryan,
God,
can I
yeah. I'm just getting like, oh shit, what? It's crazy.
I don't want to bring you down, brother,
No,
but
no, I'm good. Like, I'm not down. I'm just like, oh my God.
no, I know it's been tough for everyone though. And
Yeah,
we've all had to adjust our lives in some manner or some capacity
yeah,
to really like deal with clown world right now. And
yeah,
sometimes I was just thinking about it, and I was taking a break and just kind of disconnected from everything and kind of took an observer role and kind of
yeah,
replayed the last 2 years and the stuff I've had to deal with. And I was just like, holy cow, man. Like things have
yeah,
really gone 180 for a lot of people. And
yeah,
I'm in Florida and it's still, it's like literal clown world. People walking around with masks outside, people in the ocean with masks. And
yeah,
so, all of that stuff, the degree to which our society has changed is sometimes, you really have to step back and be like, wow, and kind of process it, because it is such a drastic effect. It's like someone just dropped you off, like
yeah,
like you described, someone just dropped you off, like we're aliens almost, right? Like it's like like you were talking about with autism. It's like, holy cow,
yeah,
I just got dropped off in the middle of this, like I'm a stranger in a strange land right now. And
yeah.
so yeah,
It's,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, I agree with you. And there's this sort of insanity to it where, like when you see those kind of movies where there's like somebody knows what's going on and they're trying to explain it to everyone else, and everyone else is just ignoring them, and they're like, oh, that's crazy. And the person in the movie, and you're watching that movie and you're like feeling that frustration. It's like we're in that movie where you can show, and people are so beyond. Like, I don't understand how people just like abandon their ability for critical thought, for reason, for rationality. The people saying trust the science are religious about COVID. Like, they're not even looking at the science. And you can explain to something all day, like, you can have these conversations, you can show people data, you can show them information, and they just, well, that's not what I've been told to believe. So therefore, so it's really frustrating because you just feel like you're taking crazy pills because you're
Yeah,
walking around
yeah.
going
Well,
like every like you can see so clearly what's happening, but all these people are just walking around like, okay,
yep.
it's a trip, man.
Um,
Really a trip.
and that's been my biggest gripe. I put out a tweet yesterday basically describing like the lengths that the Canadian government is
Yeah,
going to propagandize the people, where
yeah,
it's blatantly lying and demonizing their own citizens,
yeah.
now using, state sponsored violence against like the peaceful protesters and
Mhm.
truckers and what they have planned. And you know the I want to talk about the trade-off a little bit that you're describing. And there's always this this trap with socialism, right? And
Yeah,
it's like, hey, yeah, we'll give you all of this stuff for free, you just have to relinquish control and your freedoms to big daddy government, right? And we'll
mhm,
take care of it, don't worry, you can trust us,
yeah,
we'll take care of everything. Of
yeah,
course, that whole deal, that the incentives aren't aligned, right? The government's incentives aren't to take care of you once that system is in place. It's to
exactly.
line their own pockets
Yeah,
and then further their power. And so,
yeah,
for Canadians and the interactions I've had with them, it's always like they've put government at the top of the pedestal, right?
yeah,
That it is now their god, and
yeah,
don't worry, big daddy government is going to. And so they can't recognize when the government has gone rogue,
yeah,
because they're not led by principles, right? Like principles of
yeah,
freedom, individual liberty, stuff like that. They're led by the government. The government is
yeah,
what dictates what's right and wrong for them.
yeah,
And now it's gone completely rogue. It's gone completely totalitarian and fascist. And yet, this is kind of what you were talking about earlier, where good people are like have gone bad,
yeah.
and it's like, whoa, how do we get them back? So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's insane, man, and it's insane to see. And like you said, the way the media has been playing this trucker protest is, I mean, it's so exposed. You see, I follow it closely as and you see the protest. It's like there's white people there, black people there, uh, native Aboriginal Canadians there. We have a huge Sikh population in Canada, and there's a huge portion of truckers that are Sikhs. There's a huge Sikh population at this protest. Families like mother, dad, mom, and kids in the cab of the truck. They're there. There's been no talk at all in this whole protest about hate or anything or racism. It doesn't exist. There was one guy with a one guy in the first day with a Confederate flag who was the only person there wearing he had a ski mask on and goggles, and he was the only person there with a face covering on, and it was obvious that it was like either a troll or a plant. And there's video footage of the people, the protests, saying to this person like, "You need to go. You're not welcome here." And then you get the one guy with a Nazi flag that it just so happens Trudeau's personal photographer happens to show up right next to this guy with a brand new Nazi flag right out of the package, still with the creases in it. It's up
Mhm.
for 2 minutes to get a photo, and then it's gone. And then I had a friend of mine who was at the protest, and he was there when there's a photo that went around in all the media with someone holding up a Trump sign, right? My
Mhm.
friend was right beside it when it happened, and he said the camera crews were there. This person walked up, unrolled the Trump sign in front of the cameras, posed for a moment, and then rolled it up and disappeared again. So it's
Yeah.
like you just go, man,
Well,
and
that's the tactics they use, right? And it's
yeah,
it's all about keeping the people divided.
yeah,
And it looks like they're doing it through ideological and political lines.
absolutely,
And as long as people buy into that divide and conquer tactic, it can work, right? Because it confirms their bias. They're like,
yeah,
and so it's the truckers are out there and they're protesting and they're fighting for everyone's freedom, right? Not just their own.
exactly, exactly,
And if people picked up on this in Canada, and those that had some type of inclination that things were wrong, it could turn into a powerful movement and a powerful force for change. So how do we let's demonize them, let's
yeah,
stigmatize them,
exactly,
and let's create this propaganda around the fact that these are actual bad people. Like,
yeah,
yeah. And so yeah, it's just a government tactic that they use, and unfortunately, it seems that some people continuously fall for it. And
Yeah.
when and they don't realize that they're slowly slipping away into tyranny, and that
No.
in itself is detrimental for their own health, their own livelihood, their own quality of life, and their kids. And here
Yeah.
they are, they're too busy hating on those people that are actually fighting for freedom.
It's true, and I think something that you mentioned that I do want to touch on, I think is important. I think that we here in Canada, we've had it so good for so long, and I mean, we're now like 2 generations back from, like, World War II and all that, right? Like, we've had my generation and my parents' generation that have grown up in this, like, prosperous, peaceful, healthy, free country. And I think a lot of people have internalized this idea that the fight for freedom is over and that we won and that nothing bad could happen here. So you get that when you talk to people and you try to say, well, hey, like, the government is overreaching and they're acting like dictators and this and that. And then people just go like, well, that's just a conspiracy. Like, that couldn't happen here. Like, they think these problems that happen in other parts of the world, in Eastern Europe or South America or Africa or wherever, they think those problems would never happen here. And you just kind of go, man, the minute you stop thinking it's possible here is the minute that those people in power have the advantage. And I think it was Ronald Reagan had a quote of like, we're only ever one generation away from tyranny. And I think we're about to learn a hard lesson in this country, maybe in some parts of the United States too, in Western Europe. I mean, I think we're all the Western world right now is going to learn a hard lesson because we've sort of like been lulled into complacency. And these people right now, I think there's also this belief that nothing bad could ever happen here. There's this blind faith in government. Canada's government is huge. I mean, something like 60 cents of every tax dollar goes to government bureaucracy here. Like, it's insane.
Yep.
Our Ottawa, which is where the protest is happening, I mean, it's I don't know exactly the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if its primary industry is government. So, like, most of the people living there complaining work for the government. They haven't experienced the hardship of this too, which is another
And
thing.
and that's the other thing about a socialist government, right? It's like the incentives are off. If the government ever goes
Yeah.
rogue, you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you, right? If you're
No.
dependent on the government, it's not like you're going to stand up and cause trouble and fight for your freedoms or support anyone that's out there fighting for freedoms because, hey, how am I going to get paid next week or whatever it is? And that's what happens when you have a big bloated government, like you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. And then in Canada too, like our media, I was just watching a video this morning from Rebel News, and he was talking about we just had an election last fall, and right before the election, Trudeau's Liberal government spent 61 or 62 million dollars paying money to 1,500 different media outlets in Canada. So, and this goes from big to small, from the major newspapers and TV stations right down to like little local magazines and newspapers in small towns, and they pay this money. And then Trudeau also, I mean, a couple years back, they paid them like $600 million. This was like a bailout to save the media, but really, what it functions as is the Liberal Party paying for the coverage that they want. And
Sounds like
Trudeau,
a bribery mechanism.
100% it's a bribe. And Trudeau even jokes about this. There's a video that goes circling around. He's at some dinner or something, and he's like making a joke about it, going, well, we pay them $600 million so we get the kind of headlines we want. Ha ha ha. And it's like, yeah. And then our main media outlet, so CBC in Canada, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, it's the biggest media outlet in the country. It dwarfs all private media. That's a completely state-controlled media. It's completely funded by the state, owned by the state. So, and the Liberal Party, which is Trudeau's party, is the party that funds them the most. So if the Conservative Party in Canada were to get elected in, they would lower the funding for the CBC. So who are they gonna support? So in all the media, they're gonna support the Liberal Party because that's the one that keeps telling them we're just gonna keep giving you more and more cash.
So then, yeah, then it looks like the media then just becomes a propaganda arm for the
Absolutely.
Liberal Party in Canada, and it's just this
Yeah.
vicious cycle that
Yeah.
it's gonna have to play itself out, and
Yeah,
eventually I see it eating itself alive, because that's what happens to all kind of communist, socialist governments. They kind of just
absolutely.
end up destroying anything that's valuable, just
Yeah,
because the incentive structure is to be as uh, thieving and self-interested as possible.
yeah.
And so I guess my question is, what do you see happening more on a macro scale, on a longer timeline, like 1 year out? Do you see any do you have
Oh
any
man,
thoughts on that?
I do. I mean, it's so hard to try to, it's so hard to try to predict. I think anyone who's paying attention has familiarized themselves with the WEF and the UN and the 2030 and Agenda 21 and all that stuff. So I mean, we can see all that coming. We can see the push. I mean, you know, anyone anyone who spends more than 5 minutes looking into this stuff can quickly understand that the whole point of the COVID lockdowns and mandates was to introduce the vaccine passport, which is the stepping stone towards the digital ID. They're already talking about the carbon credits, limiting what we can spend. Trudeau's already publicly talked about like putting a limit on like distance you're allowed to drive each month for people, stuff like that. So I think we're going to see more COVID measures. We're going to see more folding in of climate change stuff. We're going to see that push towards digital ID, and then eventually digital, or not eventually, but pretty soon, I think, because they're the whole sort of central bank digital currency. I think I've seen you tweet about this too, but I think we're also looking at um, a major financial collapse. That I was just listening to another podcast this morning, and there was a guy who was a former BlackRock executive and investor, and he was talking about, he's like, the entire system is hollow on the inside, it's on the verge of collapse, it's a house of cards, and that COVID gave these governments the opportunity to just hit the speed button on the money printers and just start firing up as much money as they can to try to keep the system propped up for a little while longer, and get all this money to all their corporate buds, but it's all going to collapse. So I think I don't know, man. I'm an optimist. Like, I don't try to get too paranoid or pessimistic about things, but I think we're looking at some really hard times in the coming years. Or unless enough people wake up to hit that tipping point where we just fucking hang these motherfuckers and we start over and we just like, get ourselves back to a place where we all go, oh my God, like, look what just almost happened. We need to be careful next time. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, so I definitely think that we're beyond the point of return here, and that
Yeah,
we're just gonna have to face the consequences of the fiat money printer for the past 100 years or whatever. And like,
yeah,
it's time that society paid the piper for just becoming disconnected from its principles, its
yeah,
moral, its values, its morals. And so it's like one of those things where we're gonna feel God's wrath, I think.
yeah,
And it's when you look out there, like yourself, like it could be scary,
yeah.
but at the same time, it's also there's comfort in just um
Mhm.
accepting the worst case scenario, and therefore reorienting your life around that to some degree.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
you don't want to go full doomsday prepper,
Oh no.
um and have that consume every aspect of your identity.
Yeah,
But there is a certain you know there is a certain benefit to just accepting what's coming down the pike, and trying
yeah,
to prepare for that.
yeah,
And yeah, I think the WEF and all these people have made it very clear that they're going to push forward. And you know they have apparently all these things planned. It's funny because people want to call these conspiracy theories, but it just so happens that everything they actually talk about, it's come to fruition, right? They
yeah,
literally pre-planned a COVID pandemic, right? Just a
yeah.
few months before COVID actually happened.
Oh, yeah.
And people can't. can't make the connection there as to
Okay.
this being some type of some part of a larger agenda. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been, this is kind of how I've come to be known on Twitter, and
Yeah.
is because I talk about this. I say, hey, look, this
Yeah.
is what they're openly doing.
Yeah.
We can see it happening. So you guys better prepare. And I know, like, personally, I'm not prepared for any catastrophe right now. If there was a cyber pandemic, or if the grid went down, or if there was food shortages, or all of that stuff, I'm in the
Yeah.
I'm in the I'm in the same boat as many people.
Yeah.
But I'm working towards that, reorienting my life. And this is why I started a podcast called It Sovereign Mindset,
Yeah.
because we do need to tap more into our sovereignty. We need to become more self-sufficient. And if we can't become self-sufficient, we have to be reliant on other people or other systems. We should at least be very conscious about it, right? Because we might not have the opportunity to just go to the store and buy whatever we need pretty soon here in the next few years. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, I was talking to Michael Krieger about this yesterday on Twitter. We were having a little exchange, and it was one of those things where the tipping point that you're talking about, where people wake up, it has to come where people become ashamed as to have ever supporting these policies
Yes.
and waking up that way. Because, I mean, when you look at it, it's just self-destructive
Yes.
ideas and beliefs that people are holding.
Yeah.
And that's what's weighing society down. And it's, again,
Yeah.
all fueled by, the thing is, they've done a remarkable job at getting the entire system to confirm those beliefs, right? To reinforce those beliefs, right? If you believe this narrative, you are the good guys, and the
Yeah.
media reinforces that idea. The government reinforces that idea, and so
Yeah.
it's a hard spiral to get out of. And so we'll see what comes about
Yeah.
it. And
That's
yeah.
crazy. Yeah. I think you're right. And I know, I also, like, I look at it, I try to look at everything from a very spiritual point of view. I know you're a spiritual guy as well. Um, I'm not a Christian necessarily, but I come at things from more of a, like, Buddhist Taoist kind of vibe. Like, that's when I was really young, I just started reading that stuff, and I just really connected with me. So, like, I'm deep into that kind of perspective. And also, I mean, I look at what's happening in the world, and I know that the things go in cycles, and movements happen in cycles, and things go from order to chaos to order to chaos to order to chaos, and continuously, and that's kind of how it works. So I look at everything, and I just go, whatever happens, I know that I will stand for whatever principles I have, that I won't change, and whatever happens to me happens. I mean, I was joking around with a friend the other day, but I was like, I'm not gonna use a vax passport. I'm not gonna use a digital ID. I'm just not. So it's like, if they have to put me in jail, or I have to go on the run or hide in the woods, whatever, like, that's fine. Like, it just is what it is. And I'm not saying that makes me a martyr or hero, but it just, like, I just think at a certain point you have to stop and say, I'm not participating in this because it's fucking evil shit. And every time one person does that, it invites more people to do it, and I think that's important. But I also, just from a very sort of spiritual point of view, it's like, I refuse to live in a place of fear about all this. It's like, if they showed up right now and dragged me out of here, I'm like, okay, like, I guess that's just what's happening. Like, I don't love that that's happening, but what am I gonna do? Like, I love. I was watching this documentary a, a couple weeks ago. It's about these Tibetan lamas, right? That, like, they go off in the caves and they meditate for 3 years at a stretch and come back down. And it's like, and these guys are just, I mean, those are the kind of inspire me. And there was one guy, they were talking about when China took over Tibet, and the Tibetans had to flee, the monks, right? And there was one monk, he got arrested and was in jail, in prison in China for 30 years, and, beaten and tortured, whatever. He got out, and the Dalai Lama was talking about his conversation with this monk that had been in prison for 30 years in China. And he said to him, he said, in your time there, was there violence in jail? And the monk said, yeah, a couple of times. A couple of times I almost let myself hate my captors. And that was, so he had been, like, beaten and whatever, But the violence he was talking about was the violence in his own mind he almost allowed himself to feel, and that's how I feel. Like, I don't hate anybody. I love everyone, but, I'll still defend my property, and I'll defend my family, you know?
Sure, sure. And I think that's what's in our power. And what you said there is I've because of what's happening, I think it has awakened people to search for more meaning, right? To search for more purpose in their lives, because you start to realize a lot of the way we were living, or a lot of the way the society was structured, was all based on a farce, was based
Yeah,
on fraud, right? And I think this has to do with the money, but we'll get into that a little later. But yeah,
yeah,
it has put me on a path of you know, spiritual enlightenment in a way, to because you recognize that, oh, this is something more than what appears on the surface. They're actually like they're going for our free will. Like our free will
yes,
is at stake.
yeah,
And so you realize what the stakes are, and you realize things can get very ugly,
yeah,
and it's going to take a force beyond yourself to
yeah,
really have to deal with a lot of this stuff. And I think
yeah.
that's kind of put me on the search for God. And um, you know, I've
Mhm,
found him. I've found him, and it's completely changed my perspective on life. And
yeah,
it's been a beautiful thing. And you just realize, hey man, the other way, the other path, like the juxtaposition right now between both paths, like there's been a clear fork, and it's clear to see which way one goes and which way the other goes. And so yeah, I think for a lot of people, they are reorienting their lives to go down the path of like spiritual enlightenment. And that reminds me, your story about the Tibetan monks and all of that reminded me of one of the books that I read recently, which had a powerful impact on me, which was Man's Search for Meaning, where it was uh I think it was Viktor Frankl. Um
yeah,
he basically was in a Nazi concentration camp, and you know he his basic message is that the only thing that they can't take from you is your inner resolve, right?
yeah,
And your connection to God. And if
yeah,
you let them instill hate in you,
yeah,
that's
yes,
where that's where they've won. And
yes,
like they can torture you, you can be imprisoned, they can do all types of horrendous things to you, but you know,
yeah,
you have to find a way to maintain your inner resolve. And he does you know, he says through God, you could do
yeah,
that through God. And
yeah,
so what I've kind of come to learn. And so yeah, it's definitely interesting times. And
oh, man.
uh,
And
but
you're right. Yeah, sorry. Like, I think a lot of people are finding God, finding their spirituality, finding meaning in this too. Because people say we want to go back to the way it was. I don't want to go back to the way it was,
yep.
because I look at my life before this, and I thought I was living in an awake kind of way, and I look at so many aspects of my life where I was completely asleep. And
Hmm.
this has changed my outlook, my connections to spirituality, my resolve, my commitment to family, to truth.
Yeah.
It's changed how I eat. It's changed how I shop. It's changed how I think about money. It's changed everything. So my whole life is different than it was, and it's better than it was. So
It's more for me, it's one of those, it's more a conscious understanding of reality. You're not just
yes,
going through the motions, you're not just on the hamster wheel. You're
yeah,
actually much more aware about like how you interact with the world.
yeah,
And you say, wow, okay, I'm eating this. Why am I eating this? Is
yeah,
it good for me? Is this it- it's leading a life with much more intention. And
yeah,
that intention is connected to your morality. And you kind of to um how Gandhi says, it's like, be the change you want to see in the world. You recognize, oh, okay, like I actually have to do that. That's just not some trope or
yeah,
some
yeah.
cliche. I actually
Gotta
have
walk,
to do that.
gotta walk the talk. You
Yeah.
know, it's changed. I mean, like one example is like how I grocery shop has completely changed. Like I'm now buying my meat from local farms direct. There's a couple little small country stores that get like local everything, right? Like local spinach and local eggs and local milk from a local farm instead of the stuff in the carton in the grocery store. Like so much of that is changing. And I take my daughter, she's 6 now. I take her to this little country market store and we get groceries and we talk about where everything came from. We look at the label. We say, oh, this is from this little town, this family owned farm in this little town, 45 minutes that way. We talk about everything. And also, I mean, man, once I started really, I mean, I always knew that, yeah, all these big corporations kind of own everything and they're kind of shady. But it was a sort of abstract idea for me when I started really looking into this stuff during this whole time and actually researching like how these companies are structured, who owns what their intentions are. It's like when you realize, oh, like I put out a tweet, I think this morning or yesterday that was saying like, you know, when the companies that manufacture your packaged food are the same companies that sell you pharmaceuticals, like what incentive do they have for those packaged foods to keep you healthy? They don't. They are incentivized to sell you poison. They want to keep you in the Goldilocks sweet spot. They don't want to kill you, they want to keep you alive and keep you sick so they can then sell you drugs. So they will keep selling you the packaged food that keeps your body ill. And then they can keep selling you the drugs that your doctor is going to prescribe to cure those ailments that the food is giving you, when really you could just stop eating the packaged food and your body will heal itself. I mean, it's amazing to me. I watched a video yesterday of a guy who had Crohn's disease and was his doctor said it was incurable and you're going to be on these drugs for the rest of your life. And this guy started researching it, started playing with his diet, experimenting with different things, and then discovered a diet that worked for him and cured himself of Crohn's. So now he's no longer a lifelong customer of that pharmaceutical. But he had to do that on his own. His doctor didn't know that. He went back to his doctor, and his doctor's like, "Oh, that's weird. How'd you do that?" It's like, you're my doctor. You're supposed to know this shit. So it's really shown me also like the you know, you talk about incentives. It's like the incentives in the medical industry are so lopsided. You look at, I don't know what it's like in the States, and I haven't looked at this up in Canada, but I saw a thing and we're saying in Britain, doctors were getting paid an extra $20 per injection for COVID shots. Well, as soon as you give a doctor that incentive, guess what happens? Their entire practice becomes administering COVID shots because the doctor's already getting their salary or whatever they're making. Now you're gonna, I can do 100 COVID shots a day. Like that's an extra $2,000 I just made or whatever. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. The one of the biggest things that I think I wish people would take away from all of this is incentives matter. And it's like
Yeah,
if you want to understand people's decisions, just look at their incentives. And if
yeah,
we structure a society to incentivize, or if we structure a system to incentivize certain behavior, well, that's the
yeah,
behavior you're going to get.
yeah,
And you know what I've noticed is a lot of leftists, it's more on wishful thinking. It's more based on the
yeah,
idea, like,
yeah,
you know, oh, of course we want to incentivize doctors to give COVID shots because COVID shots are good, you know,
yeah.
and like that would never.
Oh,
And
we're gonna
so
save everyone.
yeah, and
Yeah, yeah,
so you know, it's just like, or if you incentivize, or if the money is incentivizes some certain type of behavior, it can explain that behavior. We don't
yeah,
have to create this whole other narrative, which I feel like a lot of leftists do in order to
yeah,
explain that behavior. It's like, you know, look at all the COVID cases, right? Why, you know, they're so high. And it's like, yeah, they're high because they're incentivized to report every COVID case.
exactly,
You know,
exactly.
like even they're any opportunity to, even if it involves lying or fraud, they're going to do it. Why? Because they're incentivized to do it. And that explains a lot of what we're seeing is just the incentive structure. So if you want to make sure that society, society is propagating truth, we need to incentivize, we need to create a structure to incentivize truth. But right now what we're doing is we're just incentivizing all this fraud, and I think that happens through the government apparatus. I mean, it's
Yeah,
basically that, like, you
yeah.
know, it
I read an article like I don't know, several weeks ago that it opened my eyes. It was talking about, it was back in the Middle Ages, and there was like I don't know, it was like the plague or some virus, some spreadable thing going around that was making people sick. Maybe it was the plague. I'll see if I can find. I don't know. Anyway, but anyway, so back then, and this is going back to like the Middle Ages, and the governments at the time were, because the hospitals were getting overwhelmed. The government said, "Well, we're going to start paying you this much money per case extra to help you out." Well, then you create an incentive for that hospital to have more cases. And what happened is, as the disease was petering out, people from the hospital were going around and spreading the disease into the population on purpose, like taking, whatever rags they had wiped people with and going around and wiping them on doorknobs and things people would touch to spread the disease, to get more people sick back into the hospitals, to get more money. And you look at this whole COVID thing, and you look at the beginning and the incentives for hospitals, where, okay, if you get a COVID, if you have every COVID diagnosis, we're going to give you this extra money. Every time that person has to get put on a ventilator, you're going to get this extra money. And every time a COVID patient dies, you're going to get this extra money. You've now just incentivized your healthcare structure to diagnose COVID, to overly treat it, and to
Kill.
kill.
Kill the patients.
I was about to say to let people die, but no, it's to actually to kill them.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, so that incentive, like, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this too, and I keep having the same two words in my head all the time lately. It's like psychology and incentives. If you understand human psychology and you understand the incentives, then you can see this thing so clearly. But I think a lot of people just don't look at that, and they just they're just going through their lives and they're assuming the best of others, and like, that's fine to a point, but man, like, you got to understand, even people that even people that don't think of them, they're not thinking of themselves as bad people. They're not trying to be evil, but the incentives are set up in such a way to get good people to perform evil actions without even realizing they're doing it.
Yeah. And so a lot of the incentives are created through the money system. So I want to get into that a little bit as well. I mean, I think, and that's where the meme comes from, right? You fix the money, you fix the world. Why? Because with fiat currency, you can create all these misaligned incentives that go to favor a small group of people at the expense of society. And I think that's a lot of the degradation that we've seen comes and stems exactly from that. And so now we have an opportunity to really change things around, right? And that comes through Bitcoin, through sound money, and that current instantiation is Bitcoin. And so for a lot of people, they've attached a lot of hope and meaning to this because they see it, right? They see the only reason that the hospital is incentivized to, commit fraud or to mistreat patients or to even kill them or let them die is because it's all financed through the money printer, right? Through fiat currency. And so you remove that incentive, or you remove that component, and the incentive goes away. And that happens through money which is not in the hands of the state, and that's where Bitcoin comes into play. And I feel like this is going to be the major battleground here in the next 10 years is a Bitcoin based world versus a WEF central bank digital currency world. And I think that's where the heart of all of this is going to fall, because I mean, and we'll see what actually happens. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the world just gave us a really great example with this the GoFundMe with the truckers. And people spoke up, and they spoke up with their wallets, and they spoke up to the tune of $10 million to support this protest. And then the pressure from the Canadian government onto that company, lies, just going to that company and saying, oh, these are all extremist Nazis, you can't support Nazis. And then they GoFundMe. Originally they came out and said they were going to seize the money and then give it to charities of their choosing or something. And you're just like, what? Like, this is
Can you imagine like all that money going to Black Lives Matter or some communist organization?
Let's give it to Antifa, like. So we've got these nice truckers having a protest where they've got a bouncy castle, they're sweeping the sidewalks, they're cleaning, they have a barbecue, They're peaceful. They're cleaning all the litter every day. It's like the most Canadian peaceful protest you could ever have in the world, and it's being demonized. And then the same government, or like Antifa and BLM, can like spray paint everything, light it all on fire, beat the shit out of people. That's fine. So, but yeah, so you look at that and you go, well, I see all these people posting, going, well, they should just, we should do fuck GoFundMe, like let's do it in Bitcoin. It's like I don't think these truckers know how to use Bitcoin yet. So there's a big education that has to happen. And I think once it gets to the point where it's as easy to use as like a regular app on your phone, where you can just like accept and send it really quick. I mean, there's a learning curve with all the crypto, like Bitcoin stuff. I'm only like 8 months into learning about it, and I'm still like feel like I know nothing, you
Sure.
know.
But
So, but I think you're right, and I think that's where it can go, and that money can be that, you know, assets and stuff can be free, because if these people who were donating money to that GoFundMe, I mean, could have just sent it directly to organizers. I mean, I don't know. That's one of the things I think is exciting about this kind of decentralized kind of world that we can get into, where it's like it doesn't have to go through your bank and through your government and through these companies that have the power to control you. As we both know, as soon as the government digital currency comes up, like there's a kill switch on your money, so they can just turn you off when they don't like
it's
what you're
complete
doing.
control. It's complete
Yeah,
control over every aspect of your life. And then
yeah,
they want to also introduce, like, who knows what kind of biometric meters,
yeah,
whether it's a chip or who knows what it is. But now you add the central bank digital currency in conjunction with AI technology, or just, machine learning or algorithms.
yeah,
And then you combine that with implantable chips. I mean, they control now
yeah.
every aspect of your life, you
And
know. Go ahead.
sorry, not to interrupt, but just quickly to add, I just saw an article last week. It was from somewhere in England, and they're talking about giving creating a pill to give to people to make them more compliant with
Oh yeah, I saw
COVID.
that.
And so
It's
you go,
wild.
okay, so you're gonna get people a pill, and then you see like I saw a thing with the Pfizer CEO talking about they're developing pills that will have an electronic chip in them that will send a signal letting them know when you've taken your pill. So they can create a pill that's going to make you more docile and compliant. They're going to link that pill to the grid so that they can get a signal when you take it. So if you don't take your pill, well, we can turn off your money. You know, it's like, sorry to interrupt you there, but I wanted to just add that in, because all the stuff you're saying, it's like, it's really scary shit that is complete control. And people just go, oh, that's some tinfoil hat theory. It's like, no, man, this is like,
Yep. And I just hope that people would wake up by now, right? All these that pejorative conspiracy theorist has been used to kind of dismiss a lot of what is publicly known, right? This is all
yeah,
public knowledge. It has been now for decades. They literally write out what they want to do. They write out their plans and how
yeah,
they're going to execute them. And of course, people don't like to go into the unknown and the uncomfortable, right? And
yeah,
exploring those ideas, exploring that future, it could literally paralyze people. So I understand the hesitancy, but now it's very obvious that this is the case,
yeah,
and it's time. Unless you want to go down that route and you're cool being like a digital human cyborg slave to the
oh, okay.
WEF, right? Like,
Oh,
then by all means go ahead. But for
go ahead.
those that have different plans, or want to see a different reality for their children or for themselves even, um it's time to like actually take heed and really pay attention to what's happening, and like what you're doing, Ryan, like reorient every aspect of your life in order to participate as little as possible with their
Yeah,
with their system, which
yeah.
you know and so
Great,
yeah.
like, great. Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
just like I was gonna say, like, yeah, like I'm trying to participate as little as possible in their system. I think we have to sort of build a parallel system to get us through this time. I mean, when everything goes to shit, I'm actually working with some people in my area right now to do just that. We're like creating our own little organized group to help each other with like having food, having, you know, things we need. And I think fuck, what was I just gonna say? I forget. But yeah, the system, and like right now, what I started doing is like every time I get paid, like I immediately convert that into Bitcoin. Like I keep a little out for groceries, but it's like I've stopped. The other thing too about that I've noticed about my own mental change when I started getting into Bitcoin is I started looking at every dollar I had as a potential investment for the future in a real way, because I've always kind of lived by
Mm.
the seat of my pants. I've never really had a big savings. I've been kind of a nomad, and I've always kind of lived a little hand to mouth kind of nomadic life. And then for the first time, I started going, oh well, let me not buy any stupid shit, because other than like my basic bills and food, I don't need to buy anything. And like every dollar I've spent on something stupid is a dollar I could have put into Bitcoin. So now I'm like, my mindset's changed where I'm just like, and I actually really want to know what you think about all that, because I'm new, and you're like, where do you see Bitcoin like helping or changing our world for a better way or for worse?
Yeah, so it's exactly what's happening to you, which happens to other people, right? You start saving in Bitcoin, you understand the scarcity, you understand the properties of money to a certain extent, and it changes your mindset. You start thinking more for the future as opposed to the fiat mindset, which is more of a consumption based mindset, and it's
Yeah,
spend the money as fast as you can, because if not, it's going to lose value over time. Where with Bitcoin, every purchase you make with Bitcoin, you have to weigh that against its potential future value, which,
yes, yes,
and so just that little subtle switch in, psychological processing which occurs
yeah,
starts to change the individual.
yeah,
You start to think more about what you find valuable in the world, right? Like,
yeah,
is this purchase actually worth it to me, or should I
yeah,
hold on to this? And that's the big hope Bitcoiners have, is that we fix the money, we fix the individual, and through that we fix the world. And
yeah,
yeah, for me, I think it could be one of the most powerful forces that humanity has ever seen to propagate truth, and from truth, goodness will emerge.
yeah.
And so I'm really focused on keeping the integrity of the network, secure, because
Mm.
if not, could you imagine this world without Bitcoin, for instance? Like, there would be no hope. I mean, they would roll out their central bank digital currency, and
Yeah,
there'd be we'd be relegated to cooperating with one another through barter. And so,
yeah,
at least
yeah,
with Bitcoin, it gives us an opportunity to connect, cooperate with one another
yes,
economically, on a digital level. And so, if you're in Canada, I can still send you money
yeah,
here, right? As opposed to, if we didn't have Bitcoin, I would have to use third parties and
yeah,
their systems, which they
yeah,
control,
yeah.
and
And they can stop you.
yeah, and we'd be totally cut off from each other. So there is there is a lot of potential for Bitcoin to be a powerful force for good, even if it's allowing those people who want to live free, or want to live a sovereign life, the opportunity to do so, right?
Mhm.
I've also accepted the fact that, hey, I might not see the world be fixed. We might not see
Yeah,
that, but for those that want to live a free life, who choose to live a free life, it gives them the opportunity to do so. So
yeah,
yeah, but I worry about complacency. I see how, with modern society and the institutions in our governments, how people have become complacent. They've relied
mhm,
a lot of their thinking has relied on wishful thinking versus actually um you know doing the hard things to ensure that the incentive structure is correct, kind
yeah,
of like what we just talked about. And so I think the same thing is possible for Bitcoin. I think that we really need to safeguard the monetary principles which underline Bitcoin's value proposition, because they're going to come, right? This could be potentially the most powerful force for good, and they're
yeah,
going to try to attack it. They're going to try to co-opt it. And we need to be aware of that. We can't just say
yeah,
Bitcoin is inevitable, Bitcoin can't be stopped, because if the minute we start thinking like that, that's when we open ourselves up. That's when we open up those vulnerabilities for potential co-option. And I think that it, again, if they're successful in doing something like that, then we're really I don't know if something like Bitcoin can be replicated. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know if you could jump off of anything there that I said.
Well, I have a question because I'm curious. Like, what do you see are the threats? Like, how can Bitcoin be co-opted by bad forces? Like, I'm kind of curious. Like again, I'm new. I'm
Mhm.
still trying to figure it out. But like, let's say today, uh, BlackRock, Vanguard, WEF, all these players decide, hey, you know what? Like, we're taking over Bitcoin. So they just start to buy it all up. Like, what's to
Well,
stop that?
and in a
'Cause then the
way,
price goes up, right? And I don't know, like, yeah,
sure, sure. I
yeah,
think it's a slow, just like it's a slow march through the institutions, right? It's a slow creep into getting their
yeah,
hands on the Bitcoin network.
yeah,
Uh, And again, it doesn't even have to be that they get their hands on complete control of the Bitcoin network
yeah,
to pose a formidable threat. And that's my opinion, right? So like if they get enough mining underneath their control, if they
yeah,
get enough corporations underneath their control, and those corporations like Coinbase and Gemini and
yeah,
BlockFi and all these centralized custody institutions, right?
yeah,
Whether they're exchanges or whether they're other forms, um, they're located under the jurisdiction of the US government, right? And
yeah,
so they hold a lot of Bitcoins. And imagine, they attempt a fork and they say, hey, listen, Bitcoin's fine, but we just got to change some things. We got to make sure that the criminals and the pedophiles that they can't get their hands on with that, we just limit their use of Bitcoin. Because and
yeah,
so through that moral let's just say justification,
yeah,
they add some code that creates a blacklist or something like that into Bitcoin, and they fork Bitcoin to some degree. And all the corporations and the miners that are underneath their umbrella go for it. And so we essentially get something like,
huh,
like freedom Bitcoin versus corporate Bitcoin or state
yeah,
sponsored Bitcoin.
wow. I
And
didn't know that was technologically possible to do that.
well, yeah, if you look at the other forks of Bitcoin, I mean, Bitcoin Cash still exists, Bitcoin BSV still exists, but these are just, these are to me they were a bunch of clowns who wanted to change Bitcoin, and
Yeah,
they didn't believe in the consensus mechanism of Bitcoin, and therefore and they tried to take over the network. They tried to get the network to kind of switch over to their chain,
wow,
and for their chain to be the dominant chain. So I'm not, I don't know how realistic this scenario is. All I'm
yeah,
saying is that Bitcoin has experienced forks before. I
yeah,
could see the potential for another fork in the future, another takeover attempt,
yeah,
and for there to be formidable state power behind it, which actually creates a lot of problems and makes people choose, okay, where I'm going to hold my money. And for a lot of people, if they have their Bitcoin on exchanges and those exchanges cooperate
mm,
with the government backed Bitcoin, right?
yeah,
um you have no choice, right? They only
yeah,
recognize your corporate Bitcoin. That's why it's so important for people to get their coins off exchanges, because
yeah, yeah,
you essentially are at their mercy.
yeah.
So um
What do they say? Not your wallet, not your coins.
exactly, right? And yeah, so I mean that's all I'm saying, is that we need to be vigilant. We need to really protect the network, and that's why I say if we can have off-grid miners that are independent,
Yeah,
and not corporatized and don't fall under the ESG regulatory umbrella, that's a big deal. If people run nodes, and the more plebs out there that are running nodes and validating transactions, the better.
yeah,
Um, and things like that. And again, to me, the big one is like, hey, let's not invite Marxists and socialists who
yeah,
have different principles
yeah,
than the ethos of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is very um
yeah,
like the rules are very constraining, right? Like there's 21 million.
yeah,
This is how it is. You're not going to change it. But what do the Marxists and socialists want to do? They want to co-opt, they want to infiltrate, and they want to change, right? In order to fuel their social causes. So why would we invite them in if that's how they operate?
yeah,
If there's different ways for them to work on their social causes than to be involved in Bitcoin, and we shouldn't
yeah,
be welcome. I don't believe
yeah,
we should. Once they adopt the Bitcoin ethos, that's a different
Yeah.
story, you know.
Yeah. What do you think about like certain areas? Like, I know there's like, what is it, Nigeria and like El Salvador, like different countries that are declaring themselves Bitcoin friendly areas. I've heard of different states in the U.S., like Arizona, maybe some senator or somebody recently said, "Hey, we want to make Arizona like a Bitcoin state or something." Like, what do you think of that idea? Like people trying to, well, even in Florida, didn't the mayor of Miami or something say like we're gonna be Bitcoin friendly? Like, what about that idea? People trying to use it as a way to like get people in to invest.
Yeah, I think that's great. And again, this is all about secure, like creating a secure network, and the more decentralized it is, the
Yeah,
better, right?
yeah,
And so right now, I mean, primarily, I would say the U.S. leads the world in like Bitcoin adoption and Bitcoin
yeah,
infrastructure, especially now since China kicked all the miners out. But
yeah,
if we got El Salvador creating a Bitcoin city and running Bitcoin miners, and we got Africa doing that, and we got other
yeah,
countries in South America and cities and states in the U.S. I mean, all of that, uh, they're incentivized to secure the network and keep it and keep its integrity.
yeah,
So the more decentralized these components get, the better.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the more that incentive structure really really reinforces the integrity of Bitcoin. So
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
think I think that's a good idea. I think that Bukele in El Salvador, he's leading the way, and he's still alive, and he's kind of
yeah.
opening up the playbook. And
Mhm.
so it's interesting to see what's happening. I mean, it's the game theory playing out. It's a sovereign
Yeah,
individual thesis
yeah,
playing out in real time. So we'll
yeah.
see.
It's crazy. I'm like, I'm here in Canada, and without getting into any specifics, like we are making contingency plans about possibly having to flee the country, which is insane. And I'm looking at, well, where do we go? And like El Salvador is one of the places on my potential list of like where we could go. Florida would be my first choice, but I think it's a lot harder to get into the states. Uh, how do I say this in a way that won't offend too many people? I think it's a lot easier to get into the states if you're coming up from the south than it is coming down from the north, as far
Hmm.
as being welcomed into the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be in Florida. I'd be in my car right now driving to Florida if I could legally do it. It's crazy, but yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, yeah. I've met a lot of Canadians who have fled already,
Yeah,
with their family. A lot of
yeah,
Canadians moved down to Mexico, Costa Rica,
yeah,
even here in the United States, and they're like, "Look, I mean, we consider ourselves political refugees at this point, and
yeah,
we're here, and we're gonna figure it out as we go, but we're definitely not going back to Canada."
yeah.
Which is wild, which is wild.
It's
But
wild.
again,
Like, never
go
would have
ahead.
saw that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, Ryan, listen, this was a great talk, man, and I really enjoyed it. I
yeah.
don't know if is there anything else you want to cover real quick before we wrap up?
No, that's good, man. I think this was, yeah. I really enjoyed this too. It's. I know we've been kind of talking on via Twitter for a while now, so it's fun to do this in person. And like I said, I've been listening to your show. I dig it, and I appreciate you having me on. I'm learning a lot about all this Bitcoin stuff, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I got nothing else to talk about now. I mean, there's so many things we could get into, but that would be a whole other hour and a half. So
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. Things started slowing down. I saw the opportunity to go ahead and wrap it up, and
yeah, yeah, exactly. I was like,
because I know, and it's funny, you can tell a lot about a person uh from Twitter, from their tweets, and like know
yeah,
whether you're gonna vibe and mesh with them really quickly. And so yeah, I expected a good conversation, and that's exactly what it felt like. So
well, thanks, man. I actually want to thank you because I had my first ever like viral tweet the other day.
uh-huh.
And it's getting close to 10,000 likes now, which I've never had that happen before. And it was this, and I think I sent it to you, but when I first tweeted it, it was just like, it was literally just a random thought that popped into my head when I was having my morning coffee. And I just went, oh, this is kind of funny. Tweet, like, didn't think anything of it. I think
Hmm.
you were the first person that morning to like it.
Hmm.
And
And that
then,
set it off, huh?
well, that set it off because I think that, you have like, you're over 10,000 followers now. I think by you liking it, it kind of then the algorithm shot it into some of your followers seeing it. That led to a bunch of retweets. I think Zuby saw it because of you. He
Uh-huh.
liked it. So that then set off his followers seeing it. So I'm just sitting there. I come back like an hour later and the thing's at like, it's at like 500, 380 likes or something. I was like, oh my God, that's cool. I wonder if I'll get to 500. Like, that'd be fun. And then next thing I know, it's at like 5,000 and then 9,000. And I'm just like, oh, wow. So anyway,
So real quick, that's another thing that's a conversation in itself, but it's been interesting. Like I think I started off 2020 with like 1,500 followers,
yeah,
and the interaction that you get at 10,000 followers, and
yeah,
the whole psychology of social media really starts to seep in, and you start to recognize, oh, I get it. I get why there's a problem, because the likes are like little dopamine hits, and when something goes viral, it's like really like intense. You get all this, you get all these people coming at you, and you get all
yeah.
these responses, and it's interesting. I think that, like, even there could be a course just on how to deal with social
Oh,
media engagement, to manage it in some type
yeah.
of way, because like you said, it's just one of those things where when you get your first viral tweet, or you're just like, whoa, man, there's a lot of energy behind this.
I was just
So
going, this.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did that. Like, we'll talk about this another time, but like, I just, like I said, I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat that I just like 2 weeks ago. And that was the hardest part for the first 3 days was I turned my phone off and I didn't turn it on for 10 days. And like, we're so addicted to our phones, those little dopamine hits, uh, being sort of constantly plugged into the Twitter feed. Like, what's the news? I want to know what's happening. I want to know what's happening. And it made me kind of, it was really nice to like unplug and I went no technology, no computer, no phone, no TV, no music for 10 days, just silence. And it was awesome. And I think now I'm sort of committed to doing that once a week. I'm going to have like one day a week where I just don't turn my phone on. I don't turn on music, TV, don't look at my computer, and just have a silent day once a week. I think is, I think something we could all probably benefit from, is just because
Absolutely.
we're so connected all the time. And I don't think it's good for us
And
psychologically.
yeah, no, I think that learning how to deal with social media and all of this, it's a new component to our existence, right? It's like, before you worried about the people in your tribe or the people in your community, and I mean that's the most engagement that you had, and now it's like
Yeah,
the whole world can literally be connected to you in a moment with social media. And like, I, I've had to manage that, and I've had to deal with stressful situations, and yeah, it's again, it's like taking the time to self-reflect and
yeah,
process all of that. You need silence. You need
mhm,
you need to ground yourself, and that's something that I saw Zuby does as well. Like he just disconnects from Twitter for one day, and you saying that idea out loud is making me think that I need to do that as well. It's all about finding a balance here,
yeah,
because social media has done a lot of good for me as well. It's allowed me to
yeah.
network. It's connected me
And
to some really cool people, especially growing up. I was probably more intellectual than my friends. I had different ideas, different thoughts. I just operated at a different plane, but I had no one to share that with.
yeah,
And now, for the first time, really like interacting with a lot of like-minded individuals, it's been an amazing, and having conversations has been an amazing thing. So there are good qualities about social media, but they can also be like pitfalls, and so it's just managing those pitfalls, which yeah, I think it's a process, and we just got to figure that out.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool, dude. Well, Ryan, man, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
I had a great conversation, and we'll do it again.
yeah, we will. I'll get you on my show, and we'll flip it around, and I'll ask you some more questions. So,
Yeah, that'll be great. I'm gonna stop the I'm gonna stop the broadcast, and we'll have a conversation there afterwards.
okay, cool.
All
Cheers,
right.
man. Thank you.
Oh, real quick, where can people? So you're Ryan Somers on Twitter. Is there anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, Twitter, it's like Ryan underscore Somers underscore SOMERS. My website's ryansummers.com. There's not a lot on there right now, but I'm trying to figure out how to, working on that. And yeah, that's about it. If anyone, uh, yeah, anything interesting I'm doing will show up on Twitter. So that's probably the
Best
best place
place.
to
All
find me.
right, cool, Ryan. Take care.
Thanks, man.